Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive? This time, we're cracking open Chapter 15, The Truth About Gesture.
Sounds pretty specific.
It is, but, it's from a book all about public speaking, and honestly, I think what we're about to uncover applies to just about any time you want to make your words really land.
Oh, I like where this is going, like beyond the stage, right?
Exactly.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So, lay it on me. What's this truth about gesture?
Well, the chapter starts by dismantling a huge misconception, this idea that gestures are just kind of like an extra something you add on.
Okay.
It's like almost insulting to gestures.
Huh?
The chapter uses this analogy. It's like trying to glue wilted branches onto a tree and expecting it to magically come alive.
Yeah, I see it. You wouldn't do that, would you? So, if it's not about tacking on some preset moves, what does the chapter say about making gestures work?
It's a total paradigm shift. Instead of giving you a list of rules, it argues that truly powerful gestures come from a genuine connection to your message, like real passion. When you're truly engaged, your gestures just naturally reflect that. Think about a time you were telling a story you really cared about. I bet your hands were moving without you even thinking about it.
Oh, 100%. I do that all the time. But that brings up a question for me. What about those times when maybe you aren't feeling super passionate, maybe even a bit nervous? How do we tap into that natural expressiveness then?
That's such a good question, and the chapter dives right into it. It points out that a lot of us fall into the trap of mechanical gestures. We learned a few moves, maybe a hand chop here, a point there, and we think we're good to go.
Oh, yeah. Like we've got the toolkit, right?
But as the chapter warns, that approach can end up feeling so forced and awkward.
Yeah, almost robotic. And it just doesn't work, does it?
It really doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
I once saw a speaker who was clearly trying to follow these rigid gesture rules, and it was like watching a robot trying to learn to dance.
Oh.
Their movements felt totally disconnected from their words.
Painful, right.
Incredibly distracting.
So what's the alternative?
Well, the chapter offers a really refreshing solution.
Yeah.
Observation. It encourages us to pay attention to how people naturally express themselves in everyday conversations. Watch their hand movements, facial expressions, even their posture.
Like just be a people watcher.
Exactly. Think of it as free, real-world public speaking training.
Okay, I like that. It's not about inventing gestures from scratch. It's more about absorbing.
Yes. And the chapter highlights this beautifully with a striking comparison. It talks about a group of chorus girls trying to portray fear on stage, all doing the same moves.
Okay.
And then compares that to a seasoned actor expressing that same emotion. Well, the chorus girls just look stiff and artificial, but the actor, even in a still photograph, their expression was just raw and believable.
Wow. Okay, so what made the difference?
Genuine emotion. The chapter is saying that's what drives truly compelling gestures.
I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. It's not about mastering some set of gestures. It's about tapping into that inner source of genuine feeling and letting it flow out through your movements.
That's a fantastic takeaway.
But now, how do we know how much is too much? I'm sure we've all seen those speakers who go totally overboard, right? Flailing arms, exaggerated expressions, the works. It can be as distracting as being too stiff and controlled.
Right. Like at what point does being expressive cross the line into just being too much?
Luckily, the chapter gives us a way to think about that, too. It uses this really striking image, a quiet, powerful river like the Hudson. Then it contrasts that with a noisy little creek, all bubbly and chaotic. The point being...
Sometimes stillness has more impact than constant movement.
Exactly.
That's a thought-provoking point, especially for someone like me. I tend to talk with my hands a lot. It's almost like permission to embrace those moments of stillness, to let my words hang in the air for a beat.
Absolutely. It's all about finding that sweet spot between being expressive and not being distracting. And to really drive that home, the chapter gives a great example. Senator La Follette, he delivered this incredibly intense speech, lasted 3 hours, full of fire and physicality.
Wow, 3 hours. That's commitment.
Right. So clearly a situation where big gestures were totally appropriate. And I think that's the bigger lesson here. There are no hard and fast rules. It's about reading the room, understanding your message, and letting your intuition guide you. Deliberate spontaneity, that's the key.
I love that deliberate spontaneity. And this chapter just keeps layering on these nuances, like how gestures go way beyond just your hands. Facial expressions, especially the eyes, are crucial.
Oh, I see that all the time. Think about someone grieving silently. Their face just conveys everything, even without a word spoken.
That's such a powerful image. You can almost feel the weight of their sadness. It really makes you realize just how much we communicate without even moving a muscle.
Exactly. It's all connected.
This is so fascinating, but I'm curious, how can our listener actually put all this into practice? We're talking about spontaneity, but also being deliberate. How do those two things work together?
The chapter makes the point that even spontaneity benefits from practice and self-awareness. They use this historical figure, Whitefield, who was known for his dramatic, seemingly spontaneous gestures.
Okay.
Turns out he believed no sermon was truly ready until he delivered it 40 times.
Wow. 40 times. Talk about dedication.
Right. So it sounds like what we're really aiming for here is a kind of refined spontaneity, where our natural expressiveness is also really effective.
Like a dancer who knows their moves so well, they can improvise with total grace and power.
A perfect analogy. And you don't have to preach 40 sermons to get there, but recording yourself speaking can be a game changer. You start to see your own little habits.
It's like those unconscious scantics.
Exactly. Things that might be distracting, even if you don't realize you're doing them.
So it's not about suppressing our natural way of moving. It's about becoming more conscious of it. So it works for us, not against us.
Yes, like polishing a raw diamond to bring out its full brilliance.
I love that analogy.
And that brings us to another crucial point. Our posture, it's a bigger piece of the puzzle than we might realize. Think about it. You could have the most amazing hand gestures, totally captivating.
Right.
But if you're hunched over, slouching, it undermines everything. Like a gorgeous painting stuck in a dusty, crooked frame.
Oh, that makes total sense. Posture is like the foundation of your presence, right? But I've always wondered, is there a correct posture? Like, should we all be aiming for that ramrod straight, shoulders back stance?
Actually, the chapter pushes back on that whole one-size-fits-all idea. It argues that, just like with gestures, posture should reflect the spirit of what you're saying, the occasion itself.
Oh, interesting.
Remember that example we talked about, Senator La Follette and his passionate speech? He was practically leaning forward like he was about to spring off the stage.
Yes, it totally matched the intensity of his words. Can't imagine him delivering that same speech while standing stiffly at the podium.
Right. It would felt so off.
It's connected.
Exactly. The chapter even contrasts La Follette's dynamic stance with, say, someone giving a speech about, I don't know, road-making machinery.
Okay, yeah.
The point being, your posture needs to be congruent with your message. Imagine trying to get people excited about asphalt while looking like you're about to fall asleep.
Haha. That's a funny image. But yeah, definitely not effective. So finding that balance, right? Being mindful of posture without being overly self-conscious or rigid.
Precisely. The chapter encourages us to stand like a man who genuinely feels what he is saying. Let your natural energy and conviction come through. It shouldn't feel like you're contorting yourself into some unnatural pose.
But let's be real, not everyone feels naturally confident and poised. Some of us might need a little help in the posture department. Any advice for those folks?
The chapter offers some really practical stuff. Incorporate good posture into your everyday life. Keep your shoulders relaxed but back. Head held high, core engaged. They even recommend checking yourself out in the mirror just to get a sense of how you come across.
Ooh, that's a good tip. I used to do that all the time when I was taking dance classes. It really helps you become aware of your body, how you're holding yourself.
Exactly. But like with everything else we've been talking about, the chapter cautions against getting too fixated on perfect posture. It's about finding that balance. Practice it, but don't let it become a distraction when you're actually speaking. The goal is for it to become second nature, not something you're constantly thinking about.
It's like learning to ride a bike. At first, you're all wobbly, unsure, but with practice, it becomes effortless. You're not even thinking about pedaling or balancing. You're just enjoying the ride.
Great analogy. And just like with gestures, it's about refining your natural tendencies, not trying to completely overhaul how you move.
So, quick recap on posture.
Mm-hmm.
It should be natural, match the tone of your speech, and convey that confidence and presence. But it's not about being robotically perfect. It's about letting your authentic self come through.
Perfectly summarized. You know what's really interesting? This chapter goes on to connect physical vitality with being an engaging speaker. It's like taking care of your body is a prerequisite for communicating effectively.
Whoa, that's fascinating. Never thought about it that way, but it makes sense. When you're feeling good, energized, healthy, it naturally affects how you come across on stage.
Exactly. The author talks about strength, poise, flexibility, all expressions of vitality. And without that vitality, it's harder to truly connect with your audience on a deeper level. Like trying to power a light bulb with a weak battery, it's just not going to shine as brightly.
So it's not just about techniques, it's about cultivating this energy, this presence. And that comes from taking care of yourself physically, mentally. It's almost like self-care is part of public speaking prep.
I love that. Such a simple but powerful reminder. You can't pour from an empty cup, right?
Exactly. And makes me think of Abraham Lincoln. He wasn't known for being classically handsome or graceful, but he had this incredible presence, this strength that emanated from within.
That's such a great example. True charisma comes from within, not from outward appearances.
Now, speaking of cultivating things, I'm curious about what the chapter says about learning from observation. We talked about watching people in everyday life, but it seems like it goes even deeper than that.
It definitely does. It goes beyond just watching folks on the street and says we can find inspiration for movement and gesture in all sorts of places. Even studying sculptures and paintings, how artists capture human emotion through form.
Wow, that's a really unique perspective, expanding our definition of what it means to be a student of gesture.
Right. We're observing art, observing the world around us.
The chapter even mentions watching animals to understand how they use movement to communicate.
Yes. Think about the grace of a cheetah, the power of a bear, the playfulness of a puppy. There's so much we can learn from the natural world.
It's like we're surrounded by these incredible teachers if we just open our eyes and pay attention.
Exactly. But then how do we take all these observations and actually apply them to our own style? Seems like a big leap from watching a ballet to giving a presentation.
Right. How do we bridge that gap?
The chapter gives some practical examples. It says, if you want to learn how to express victory, watch people on election night when their candidate wins. Or to learn how to plead a cause, observe how people make requests in everyday life.
So finding inspiration in real-world situations, not just coming up with gestures in a vacuum?
Yes, it's like building a vocabulary of movement based on our observations and experiences.
And it seems like that idea of developing your own unique style is really central to this whole chapter. Not about mimicking others, but letting those observations inform your own authentic expression.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And that's where practice and self-awareness come back into play. The chapter encourages us to constantly observe ourselves, to see what works, what doesn't, and how we can refine our movements to become more effective communicators.
It's like becoming a student of ourselves.
Exactly. Not about achieving some perfect ideal. It's an ongoing process of learning, experimenting, refining.
That's what makes it so powerful.
And ultimately, I think that's what this whole chapter is about, embracing the journey of becoming a more authentic and impactful communicator. It's not a destination, it's an ongoing exploration.
You know, as we've been going through all this, the thing that keeps hitting me is how much the chapter stresses genuineness. It's like, forget about trying to be perfect, just be you.
Totally, because the most effective gestures, they're the ones that come from a place of real authenticity.
And that actually leads to another point the chapter makes. Don't overthink it.
Oh, yeah.
If you're too busy trying to get every gesture perfect, it's just going to look stiff and unnatural.
Right. Like totally forced.
It's like the difference between someone trying to impress you with their dance moves
Okay.
versus someone who's just lost in the music, genuinely having fun.
I get it.
The chapter uses this hilarious example, an elocution class where everyone's being taught to gesture in this super dramatic, prescribed way.
Oh, man, I can just imagine.
It probably looked ridiculous, kind of like those old silent films, you know?
Yeah.
The actors' movements were so exaggerated.
Yeah.
It's almost comical now because it just feels so fake.
Inauthentic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why the chapter is all about trusting your instincts, letting go of that need to control every little movement.
Let your body just express what you're feeling.
That sweet spot between deliberate and spontaneous.
You got it. And that's where practice comes in. The more you do it, the more comfortable you'll become with expressing yourself physically.
That's like any skill, right? The more you practice, the more natural it becomes.
Yeah.
And that self-consciousness just melts away.
You're free to connect with your audience.
Exactly. So how can our listener actually put this into practice? What advice does the chapter give?
Well, it encourages speakers to record themselves, see how they come across.
Oh, that's a good one. Like watching yourself on video.
Yep. Notice any habits that might be distracting, like those little things we do when we're nervous, like fidgeting or pacing.
Those unconscious things we don't even realize we're doing.
Exactly. Once you see it, then you can consciously work on it, refine your movements, develop a style that feels authentically you.
It's a journey.
It is, discovering your own unique way of expressing yourself physically, finding that balance between natural and effective.
I love that. So to wrap things up, what are the key takeaways you'd want our listener to remember from all of this?
The biggest one is, Effective gestures, they're not about following a bunch of rules. It's about expressing your genuine thoughts and feelings in a way that connects with your audience.
Being authentic.
Yes, and present, letting your natural energy shine through.
So well said. And as you go about your day today, I want you to really pay attention to how people communicate nonverbally.
Yes.
What can you learn from their natural gestures? How can you apply those observations to your own communication?
Keep experimenting, keep refining, and most importantly, have fun with it.
That's what it's all about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of gesture.
Thanks for having me.
Until next time, keep those hands waving and those expressions flowing.